Honestly, Alara, at 32, clinging to that dusty archival job and spending your evenings with antique books, you are simply setting yourself up to die alone with your cats. And trust me, dear, cats don't pay for beachfront property. The hook landed with the cool, practiced cruelty that was my mother, Victoria's signature style. She delivered the pronouncement across the wide expanse of the mahogany dining table, her voice clear enough to silence the murmurs of our extended family gathered for the annual summer solstice dinner. The laughter that followed was light, polite, and terribly familiar, the sound of the Hayes family confirming my terminal failure. My name is Alara Hayes. I was 32, and the dusty archival job was the position of Chief Historical Curator at the prestigious New England Heritage Trust. My world was indeed one of quiet scholarship, meticulous preservation, and intellectual pursuit. To my mother, however, I was an anachronism, a quiet failure in a world that valued loud, visible success, particularly successful romantic coupling. The context and character intro was rooted in their obsession with hierarchy. My mother, Victoria, was a society matriarch whose entire identity was built on visible status and strategic marriages. My sister, Serena, 35, was the golden standard, married to a successful corporate lawyer, mother to 2 impeccably dressed children, and mistress of a sprawling estate, the embodiment of the life Mom prescribed. I, the quiet, intellectually driven one, was the stain on their perfect social ledger. The background conflict was the decade of public mockery regarding my romantic life, or lack thereof. Serena, who treated her marriage more like a highly visible performance than a partnership, delighted in reinforcing Mom's pronouncements. "It's true, Alara," Serena chimed in, adjusting the enormous diamond ring on her finger. "You're smart, yes, but you lack sparkle. Men want vibrant partners, not someone who quotes obscure historical treaties over dinner. You need a visible life, not a life lived in the footnotes." My father, Arthur, who preferred financial metrics over emotional cruelty, simply sighed. "It's the security, Alara, who will take care of you. We're not getting younger. Serena is stable. You need stability." The current event trigger was this dinner itself, held at my parents' estate, an annual ritual designed to showcase the family's success and, inevitably, my isolation. The conversation had veered, as it always did, to Dr. Alistair Thorne. "Did you read Alistair Thorne's latest piece in The Atlantic?" Mom asked the table, her voice immediately softening with reverence. "The one on Renaissance financing? Such brilliance, such elegance. That is a man of true consequence. That is the kind of legacy a woman should aspire to marry into." Dr. Alistair Thorne, 55, was the family's intellectual idol, a world-renowned historian, author, philanthropist, and devastatingly charming widower, whose wealth was matched only by his formidable intellect. Mom obsessed over his every move, every article, every charity donation. He was the unattainable paragon against whom all other men, and by extension I, failed. The humiliation scene intensified. "Well, perhaps Alara can send him fan mail from her archives," Serena laughed, lifting her wine glass. "At least she'd be useful for something. Imagine, Mom, Alistair Thorne as a son-in-law? A true scholar, not a—" She paused, glancing at my modest dress and my untouched wine glass. "Not a cat collector." The laughter returned, stinging and prolonged. I sat, quietly enduring the public assessment of my worthlessness. They assumed my quiet life meant an empty life. They believed I had nothing to show. But they had no idea. The proof of worth. Revelation had been cultivated in silence. 6 months prior, Alistair Thorne had walked into the New England Heritage Trust archives, seeking assistance with his new book, A Definitive History of New England's Founding Families. He needed someone with specialized knowledge of obscure colonial land deeds and maritime trade routes. I was the only person in the trust who possessed that specific, intricate knowledge. Our collaboration had been quiet, intense, and deeply rewarding. It began with long days tracing faded ink in dusty documents, evolved into shared late-night meals in the archive reading room, and then, months later, quietly moved to private dinners at his secluded Beacon Hill residence, discussing everything from 18th century philosophy to contemporary politics. Our relationship was not loud, visible, or performative. It was intellectual, respectful, and profound. Just last week, during a quiet dinner overlooking the city, Alistair had given me a small antique silver locket containing a lock of his late wife's hair, a gesture of profound trust and commitment. He had asked me to marry him, not with a fanfare of diamonds, but with the quiet promise of a shared intellectual life. We had agreed to keep the engagement secret until his book launch, ensuring the focus remained on his academic work, not our relationship. Now, listening to my family mock me using the name of the man who planned to be my husband, I felt a familiar cold clarity settle over me. It was time to introduce them to their idol. I set down my water glass, the chime of crystal cutting through Serena's ongoing monologue about my tragic future. "Alistair Thorne is currently speaking at the Harvard Symposium, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "He won't be joining us tonight." "Of course not," Serena scoffed. "He's busy being brilliant, not wasting time with—" The sharp, insistent ring of the front door chime cut her off. My parents' housekeeper, Mrs. Petrov, looked flustered. She opened the heavy oak door, and a tall, distinguished figure stood silhouetted in the hallway light. "Good evening," the figure said, his voice rich and deep, instantly recognizable from countless interviews my mother had forced us to watch. "I apologize for the intrusion. I seem to have left my portfolio here after the initial meeting this morning. Is Arthur Hayes available?" My mother froze. Arthur, my father, shot out of his chair, nearly knocking over his wine. The entire table was stunned into absolute silence. The man standing in the doorway was none other than Dr. Alistair Thorne. Alistair, looking impeccably elegant in a dark suit, scanned the room. His eyes passed over Arthur, over Victoria's gaping face, and finally they landed on me. His expression softened into a profound, intimate smile, a smile that spoke volumes about shared secrets and mutual respect. "Ah, there you are, my love," Alistair said, his voice now only for me, walking past the frozen tableau of my family. He ignored my mother's extended, shaking hand, bypassed Arthur's attempts to introduce himself, and walked directly to my chair. He placed a hand gently on my shoulder, his warmth a stark contrast to the icy air in the room. He leaned down, his eyes locked with mine. "Ilara, I simply couldn't wait until tomorrow. I need my chief researcher. And I need my fiancé." The revelation was delivered with the quiet authority of a man accustomed to commanding rooms far grander than this. The silence that followed was so thick, so absolute, that I could hear the faint, frantic pounding of my own heart against my ribs. My family, who had just spent the last 20 minutes mocking my destiny, now looked like statues carved from sheer, unadulterated shock. The turning of tables had begun. The aftermath was not a burst of noise, but a slow, excruciating collapse of their reality. Victoria, my mother, was the first to move, rushing forward, her carefully constructed composure shattered. "Alistair!" "Dr. Thorne, what are you saying? Fiancée, Ilara?" "But she works in the archives. She was just telling us about the symposium." Victoria's voice was a frantic, high-pitched squeak. Alistair straightened, his hand still resting possessively, yet tenderly, on my shoulder. He looked at my mother with polite, frigid distance. "Ilara is indeed my chief researcher, Victoria. Her grasp of colonial documentation is unrivaled. She has been indispensable to my forthcoming book. And yes, we became engaged last week." He reached into his inner pocket and produced a small velvet box. He didn't open it. He simply placed it on the table next to my untouched wine glass, right where the laughter had subsided seconds before. The locket was our promise. "This is the announcement." Serena, who had slumped back into her chair, looked utterly defeated. "But the cats, Mom. She was going to die alone with her cats." "Serena," Arthur snapped, finally finding his voice, though it was strained with terror at the social implications of this colossal misstep. He was already calculating the immense social capital Victoria had just ruined by mocking the future wife of their idol. Alistair looked calmly at Serena. "I find Ilara's quiet intellectual life profoundly appealing, Serena. Unlike the performative displays that seem to define success in some circles, Ilara's worth is derived from substance. I assure you she is not interested in collecting cats. She is interested in collecting data, which is far more valuable." Arthur, ever the pragmatist, stumbled forward, extending a hand that Alistair accepted reluctantly. "Dr. Thorne, Arthur Hayes, it is a profound honor. We had no idea. We thought Ilara was simply assisting you on a minor academic project." Her contribution is far from minor, Arthur, Alistair replied, releasing his hand quickly. She is a partner in every sense of the word, and I would appreciate it if you and your family could refrain from diminishing her professional and personal choices, especially in my presence. Victoria, recovering with dizzying speed, performed the ultimate pivot. She rushed to my side, grabbing my hands and smothering me in a hug that smelled overwhelmingly of desperation and expensive perfume. Oh, my brilliant girl. We always knew you were destined for greatness. Alistair, my dear, welcome to the family. We simply adore your work. The piece on Renaissance financing was masterful. I gently extracted myself from her grasp. Mother, you spent the last 10 minutes agreeing with Serena that I would die alone, lacking the necessary sparkle for love. The cats, remember? Victoria's mask flickered, but she held her ground. That was playful teasing, darling. We were just worried about your security. Now, of course, you have all the security in the world. Alistair, you must tell us everything. How did this quiet little romance blossom? Alistair, reading the room and my clear distress, knew exactly what to do. He stepped closer to me, placing his hand protectively at the small of my back. I am afraid that is a story Alara and I will share when we choose to. For now, I only came to retrieve my portfolio and ensure that my fiancée was being treated with the respect she deserves. She seems quite ready to leave, Victoria. He didn't wait for permission. He looked at me, his eyes asking the silent question. I nodded, a profound wave of relief washing over me. Good evening, everyone, I said, lifting my chin, my voice steady and strong for the first time that night. I walked away from the table, my hand resting naturally in the perfect curve of Alistair Thorne's elbow, leaving behind the wreckage of my family's carefully constructed social order. The weeks that followed were a surreal storm of chaos and social maneuvering orchestrated by my mother. Alistair and I retreated to his secluded country estate, allowing Marcus, my chief counsel, to handle the legal and social fallout. The public and private reckoning. The engagement announcement, officially released 2 days later through Alistair's foundation, sent shockwaves through the society circles my mother inhabited. Victoria and Arthur, who had spent years cultivating their status, were suddenly besieged by calls, not just of congratulation, but of intense curiosity and thinly veiled malice. Everyone knew they had treated their younger daughter as a failure. Victoria tried to leverage the situation immediately, giving a breathless interview to the local society page claiming that she had mentored Alara's brilliant connection with Alistair, and that she had always known her. Quiet Scholar would find her match. Alistair, however, was a man who prized truth above all else. He released a concise counter-statement through his PR team. Dr. Thorne and Ms. Hayes's relationship developed entirely independently of external influence, based on mutual respect for their respective academic work. The word external was a subtle, yet damning reference to my mother's attempts to claim credit, effectively silencing her. Serena, meanwhile, was in quiet turmoil. Her husband, who was facing a difficult quarter at his firm, was furious that Serena had publicly humiliated the woman who was about to marry the most respected name in their social sphere. He banned Serena from discussing my romantic life or my past failures, recognizing the immense social capital that was now attached to me. The failed integration attempt. Victoria, however, was not easily defeated. She recognized that Alistair's acceptance was her ticket to the upper echelon of society. She began a calculated attempt to integrate herself into our lives, believing she could simply erase the past through relentless flattery. She sent daily deliveries of expensive flowers to Alistair's estate, along with notes praising his masterful intellect. She tried to contact Alistair's personal assistant to schedule family integration dinners. She even volunteered to host our engagement party, planning an opulent, visible event designed to showcase her triumph. Alistair handled her attempts with cool, polite evasion. Every call was screened. Every email was diverted. He understood that my mother's attention was conditional and self-serving. 1 month after the engagement, Victoria managed to corner me during a brief trip I made to the city archives. She looked distraught, her makeup slightly askew. "Ilara, darling, you must let me host the party. It's what everyone expects. Serena and I have already booked the grand ballroom at the Carlisle. Think of the guest list. Alistair needs this public support." "Alistair needs nothing, Mother," I replied, carefully examining a 17th century ledger. "And our engagement will be celebrated privately. Your public support would require me to pretend that the last 10 years of mockery never happened, which I am unwilling to do." But the optics, Alara. Everyone knows how quiet you are. They need to see a grand family event. They need to see us celebrating you. They need to see you associated with Alistair Thorne, Mother. And that's the difference. Your concern is visible status. Mine is quiet integrity. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. You are being vindictive, Alara. You are punishing me for being honest about your prospects. Don't you understand? If you marry Alistair without a public blessing, people will talk. They will say he married the family disappointment without our approval. Let them talk, Mother, I said, closing the heavy ledger with a definitive thud. Their talking is what gave me the quiet space to meet Alistair in the first place. You defined me by my perceived loneliness. I will define myself by my chosen partnership. I am not punishing you. I am simply choosing who has access to my life and by extension to Alistair's world. And for the moment, that access remains restricted. The unavoidable marriage, the final scene of humiliation. Alistair and I married 4 months later in a small, private ceremony in his historic library. The guest list was small, comprised only of our closest colleagues, a handful of Alistair's academic friends, and my Aunt Martha. My parents and Serena were not invited. Victoria was devastated by the exclusion, not by the loss of witnessing her daughter's happiness, but by the complete denial of the social spectacle she craved. She wrote a furious, pleading letter, addressed to Alistair directly, questioning my loyalty and claiming I was emotionally unstable. Alistair responded personally, a typewritten note that was concise and final. Victoria, Alara, and I are united in our commitment to truth and integrity. Your history of public and private cruelty toward Alara demonstrates a profound lack of both. Until you can genuinely acknowledge and redress the emotional damage you inflicted, we must respectfully decline any relationship. The wedding was quiet, perfect, and utterly devoid of the stress my family would have imposed. I married the man I idolized, a man who saw my worth in the quiet space they had condemned. The extended resolution, the inescapable consequence. The long-term consequence of the marriage was a complete, systematic reversal of the social dynamics in the Hayes family, designed by fate and executed by Alistair's unyielding standards. The financial and social collapse of Serena. Serena, relying heavily on the social leverage provided by her husband's corporate career, found her world beginning to fray soon after my marriage. Her husband, who continued to face professional setbacks, realized that he desperately needed the network of intellectual and philanthropic elite that Alistair commanded, a network he could now only access through me. Serena's desperate attempts to network were met with polite but firm resistance from Alistair's peers. They knew the history. They knew Serena was the cruel sister. Her visible social perfection, once her greatest asset, became her greatest liability. She was seen as petty and shallow, a stark contrast to the quiet integrity Alistair and I projected. Her marriage, already strained by performance and debt, collapsed completely. Her husband left her for a younger partner, and Serena was forced to sell the sprawling estate, the very symbol of the stability she had mocked me for lacking. She moved back into a small rented apartment in the city, her visible status completely ruined. She called me, not to apologize, but to beg for a connection to Alistair's philanthropic world, believing his foundation could offer her a high-status job. I answered the call personally, a rare breach of my professional firewall. Alistair's foundation requires professional experience and commitment, Serena, not visible status. Your experience is managing social expectations, not managing budgets. But I need the connection, Alara.
I need the status.
I'm ruined, she wept. You are ruined by your own choices, Serena. You traded substance for sparkle, and the market found your value worthless. I will not grant you access to Alistair's world to repair the damage you inflicted on yourself. I ended the call, severing the final tether. Arthur and Victoria, the price of access. Arthur and Victoria continued their desperate dance, realizing that the only way to retain any social standing was through occasional, extremely restricted access to the Thorne-Hayes world. 2 years after the marriage, Alistair published his monumental book on New England financing. The book launch party was the social event of the decade, held at the Boston Public Library. Arthur and Victoria were granted an invitation, a deliberate, calculated move by Alistair to force their public compliance. They arrived early, meticulously dressed, nervous and utterly subdued. They spent the entire evening circulating the room, talking to guests, not about themselves, but exclusively about Alistair's genius and my intellectual contributions. They became my most awkward but most obedient public relations managers. They approached me toward the end of the evening, their faces etched with the strain of their performance. "Alara, darling, everyone is saying your chapter on the maritime economy is revolutionary," Victoria gushed, her eyes scanning the room, making sure important people were watching. "We are so proud." "I'm glad you finally read the book, Mother," I said quietly. "And I'm glad you are supporting my work in public. That is the price of your presence here." Arthur, looking exhausted, pulled me aside. "Serena is working in retail now, Alara, selling handbags. It's a difficult adjustment for her." "Serena chose visible status over substance, Dad. She is experiencing the consequence of her own priorities," I replied. "She mocked me for my perceived solitude. Now she is alone. I married the man she idolized. Now she is merely a footnote in his social world. That is the justice of the universe, Arthur, not my vindictiveness." The final victory. Shared legacy. Alistair and I built a magnificent life together, one defined by intellectual collaboration, quiet philanthropy, and shared respect. We traveled the world, co-authored articles, and launched a massive foundation dedicated to historical preservation and academic scholarship. One evening, 4 years into our marriage, Alistair and I were sitting in the quiet library of our home, reviewing research notes. He handed me a glass of wine and smiled, that profound, intimate smile that still made my heart skip. "You know, my dearest Alara," Alistair said, touching the small locket I always wore, "your mother once sent me a Christmas card long before we met, extolling the virtues of her golden daughter, Serena, and mentioning, almost as an afterthought, her quiet single daughter, who was destined to collect cats." I looked up, surprised. "I didn't know she sent you cards." "She did. I never read them, of course, but I had my assistant archive them. When we began our collaboration, I reread them. It was a clear portrait of prejudice and conditional love. I realized then that the quality I valued most in you, your quiet, unyielding focus on substance, was the very thing your family scorned." He leaned closer. "Your mother's cruelty was your greatest gift, Alara. It forced you to build your worth in a space they couldn't reach. And in doing so, you became the woman who could marry a man like me, not for my money or my fame, but for the shared solitude of our intellectual world." I reached up and gently touched his cheek. I always knew I would find love when I stopped looking for the validation they demanded. And I found it with the one man they idolized, believing I was still the girl they left behind. The knowledge was final, peaceful, and complete. I didn't just win the man they idolized. I proved that the emotional currency they valued was worthless, and that the quiet world they condemned was the only path to true, unassailable success. I had defied their curse and found profound partnership, ensuring that I would never, ever die alone with my cats. I would die surrounded by love, respect, and a legacy built on truth, not facade.